Look, it's a great honor to be here with all of you. And I want to thank all the folks at Esri, Jack Dangermond, Clint Brown, Matt Arts, Stacy, and Catherine Ortiz for all the work that they put into this book, which is out on your tables. This is the first time I've gotten my hands on it and seen it in its actual physical form. You know, out at the lunch, Jennifer asked me, and she said, "Why'd you write this book?" And all sorts of reasons flooded into my mind. And I'll give you just kind of the highlights. Number one, I wrote this book because I feel like I have been very fortunate in life to have been tipped to these insights, this revolutionary power that GIS has. People like Jack Dangermond, Jack Maple, and others. And so I felt an obligation to share it with others. You know, I was very fortunate for 15 years to surf in the curl of the wave of this new way of governing, and I wanted to pass that on. Second reason, I've taught a course in a number of different iterations, Boston College, University of Maryland. That was the funnest, actually. University of Maryland, 187 kids every Thursday for a couple of hours. And in one of those classes, a young man raised his hand and he said, "You know, all this technology is all great and everything." He said, "But without leadership, it doesn't really amount to a hill of beans." And I said to him, "Congratulations, you can leave. That's the entire point of the course." But there's a third reason that I really wanted to write this book, and I'm so grateful to Esri for publishing it, and then it is this. There is a crisis today in Western democracy. And it is a crisis in Western democracy, not only in the United States, but Western democracy the world over. And that crisis in Western democracy is Western democracy itself. Whether it still works, whether it produces results, whether we are still capable of achieving real, tangible results, the sort of results upon which all trust and citizenship is ultimately based. You know, whether democracy can still be made to work again, whether it can still deliver public goods. But you know, the future is always a choice, and darkness makes a great canvas. So fear not and believe. There is a new way of governing emerging all across our country and all around the world, and is emanating up and out from cities and towns and counties. In fact, its defining characteristics are of openness and transparency are already hardwired into the rising expectations of a new generation of Americans. Let me show you what I mean. 50 years ago, Robert F. Kennedy said that it is from the numberless diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. Each time a man or woman stands up for others or strikes out against injustice, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope. That was on a refrigerator magnet in my home. I was 10 years old before I realized it didn't come with every refrigerator, you know? Now, that quote was true 50 years ago when Robert Kennedy said it, but it's not so true now. Why? Because those diverse acts of courage and belief are no longer numberless. They can all be numbered. They can be plotted. They can be mapped. They can be measured. And we can calculate now, and we can model how many ripples it takes in order to amount to that wave of change that's actually sustainable. That's a big new deal for governing. Two technologies have come together in a relatively, I know it seems slow sometimes when we're in the trenches doing this work, but in a relative flash. Two technologies have dovetailed to really be a game changer in democracy and public administration. One is GIS, the other is the Internet of Things. This is a screenshot from my trusty iPad, and it is actually my commute when I was teaching at Georgetown one semester. And if you told my neighbors in North Baltimore that I had to drive from North Baltimore to Washington to Georgetown at rush hour, they would say, "Oh, you can't do that from here." But what would I do? I would do what all of us do. I would just plug in the coordinates into my handy dandy either phone or iPad, and voila, a pleasant sounding female voice emerges. I call her Mary, and Mary is never mistaken about the road or the destination. And if there's an accident along the way, Mary will tell me a quicker route is available. And she's always right. That's a two-dimensional map, but it is the powerful new tool that I've seen mayors all across the country putting into place. Our ability to model the belief space of a city, a county, a state, a nation, indeed, even of the planet. Our ability to model, measure, and map our built and natural environment and the human dynamics which unfold across them in real-time ways that all can see. We have never had better technology. We've never had better tools. No democracy has ever had the ability that we do. What we need is leadership. And what I've seen is a new way of leadership is emerging all across the country. If the old ways of leadership were about hierarchy, bureaucracy, command, control, the new ways of leadership are fundamentally entrepreneurial. What do I mean by that? I mean asking the question, does it work or does it not? It is performance measured. It is interactive, and it is collaborative. The great Shimon Peres, now of blessed memory, once said to me, in the information age, people know things at the same time as their leaders. And very often they know these things before their leaders. That's created a big shift. That's created a big change in the common wisdom of leadership, right? In the old days, not too long ago, 10, 15 years ago, and in some states still, leaders think that the place to be, the place of situational, positional advantage, is high atop that pyramid of command and control. Things get done on the basis of because I said so, and one of the things we control is information. It's a bad time to be a control freak if you're in public life, because all of that has changed. There is no advantage to staying high above that pyramid of command and control. Instead, effective leaders need to put themselves in the center of that latest emerging truth, focusing a collaborative team and insisting on a regular cadence of collaboration and accountability around the actions that actually get us better results. True story. When I was elected mayor of Baltimore back in 1999, Mayor Schmoke, my predecessor, kindly agreed to set up transition interviews, and I sat with the outgoing head of the Department of Public Works. And having served for 2 terms on the Baltimore City Council, I was well accustomed to the old rules of city government. I was only learning the new ones. But I asked the outgoing director, knowing that the fleet maintenance and the number of trucks and cars we have is a big expense, and knowing that we needed to squeeze as much savings out of everything else in order to fight drug addiction and make our streets safer, I said, so Mr. Director, how many cars and trucks do we actually own? He said, 6,500. I said, 6,500? He said, 6,000? I said, 6,000? What is this, a quiz show? I don't know. I was hoping you would, since it's such a big cost. And he said, well, you know, in some organizations, you never get some things really down. We've never really gotten this fleet thing down. Now, a more rational and less experienced person would have run like the cowardly lion down the long hallway and dove out the window. But that was just the way it had always been. The old rules of city government went something like this. If the mayor really wants to find out how many cars and trucks we have, we can find out. But we'll have to take people off all of our other jobs, and it'll take weeks, right? Do these sound familiar? The second old rule of city government. We'll get to that as soon as we can, but it'll take a few months because our budget was cut last year, implicitly by you jerk. Third old rule of city government. These are kind of interchangeable, and the red flag that you're getting an excuse is whenever you hear the word here. They go something like this. That wouldn't work here because this is the way we've always done it here. Or we're already doing that here. Or we tried that once and it didn't work here. And then the fourth old rule was, golly, I really hope everyone forgets about this question before next year's annual budget hearing. And let's face it, in the old rules, the only hearings we ever had were annual, right? Measure fiscal inputs instead of the outputs. Mark Morial, the former mayor of New Orleans, once said to me, only half jokingly, when I was first elected mayor, he said, kid, if you ever want to hide something, make sure you put it in the city charter or the city budget, because nobody ever reads either one. But I had seen something going on up the road from us in New York, and it was called CitiStat. I had seen how the people of New York, how police commanders were using GIS and a regular cadence of collaboration, that leadership method of bringing people together, focusing on the latest emerging truth to reduce crime in ways that nobody ever thought was possible. You remember back in the early 90s, they were doing movies about New York, Escape from New York, build a big wall around it, towers, things are just gonna get worse there. Well, New York went on to achieve some pretty dramatic reductions, saved a lot of lives, and they did it with a method pioneered by a guy named Jack Maple, who was the recipient of one of the largest promotions in all of American policing. Bill Bratton saw his genius for using GIS and motivating people to work against deadlines as he demonstrated it in one little portion of the New York City subway system. He was a lieutenant, and Bratton lifted him up and made him the deputy commissioner for the whole NYPD for tactics and strategies, and CitiStat was born. When I was elected mayor in 1999, Baltimore had become the most violent, addicted, and abandoned city in America. I campaigned on implementing CitiStat and also doing things that worked to reduce drug overdose deaths. And so we became the first city government to take CitiStat from simply a police model of management, and we made it enterprise-wide. We put 311, first city to put 311 together with CitiStat. We earned the Innovations in Government Award from the Kennedy School at Harvard, and the concepts were the same as CitiStat. Timely, accurate information shared by all, rapid deployment of resources, effective tactics and strategies, relentless follow-up and assessment. And I'll tip you something here that Jack Maple said with me. He said, you know, lots of people want to be able to tick off these 4 things, but they always want to leave off the phrase that says, shared by all. You mean by some managers? No, by all. You mean like some managers down to the level of some of the people that are supervising it? No, shared by all. You mean all within city government? No, I mean shared by all, including citizens. At the state level, we called it StateStat, and it became very important at that broader enterprise to have strategic goals with public deadlines. What kind of public deadlines? Things like reduce violent crime by 20% by 2012. Increase college and career readiness 25% by 2012. And all of these were public facing. Because if citizens are in charge in the democracy, citizens should know whether we're hitting our goals or whether we're not, right? Some of our goals had a big nasty red arrow on them for all 8 years that I served as governor. But at least people knew why. You know, we'd like to double transit ridership. We can't do it until we get some other inputs. You get the point. Esri clearly gets the point. You know, some of those slides I showed you before, I confess, they look very antique and from the dinosaur age. We were piecing that together for the first time then. Esri's productized it and turned it into ArcGIS. But it's all the same concept, right? It's the same that the governor was talking about from Kenya as well. It's the ability to actually model, measure, map, drive leading actions, and lift up the leaders. But here's the thing. What I've also learned is that none of this works unless the leader insists upon and drives a repeating cadence of collaboration and follow-up. And I know that some of you who are GIS professionals have probably been frustrated that people in your own organizations, the so-called higher-ups, don't appreciate the power of the tool. I don't know exactly what the remedy is for that, but I can tell you that in whatever part of an organization you are in, human beings work against deadlines. And if you bring people together in recurring meetings focused on the latest emerging truth, your leaders will rise to the occasion. That repeating cadence of collaboration and accountability for us in the city of Baltimore looks something like this. Every 2 weeks, we would have 10 different departments come through 1 hour at a time. On one side of the table in the CitiStat room would be the mayor and my command staff. Peggy Watson, our finance director, our HR person, our head of IT, our city solicitor. And on the other side of the table would be the head of solid waste and his command staff. After that 1 hour of focus, the room would change over and the housing commissioner would come in with her command staff. And we would focus for one blessed hour. We'd lock the whirlwind outside the door, not talking scandals of the day, not talking, the gossip of the hour. We're gonna focus on operations. We're gonna have the patience to ask the 5 whys, to get to the root causes of the problems that are keeping us from making our city cleaner or healthier. And that's what we did. We started. We didn't wait till we were perfect, till we had all the data sets right, till all the graphs look pretty and we're going in the right direction. If you wait for that, you'll never start. We started and we got a little better all the time. Jack Maple once said to me, do you want to make 1% annual progress? Or do you want to make 1% progress every 2 weeks? I said, I want 1% progress every 2 weeks. He said, then Mayor, you gotta lay down that cadence of accountability and make people come in every 2 weeks and discuss as a team. And when you do that, it's amazing how the leaders rise. Let me give you a few examples, just three. Gonna start with public safety. We were the recipients. Eric Holder came, great fanfare. The whole congressional delegation was there. We were one of the last grants out of the old Clinton administration to receive 200 additional police officers to put onto the streets of Baltimore. So we had a decision to make. Where to deploy the police? Now, with the old rules of government, a way to do it that might be fair would be to look at that map with the 6 colored districts on it. Those are the council districts. You bring in the senior council person from each of those districts and you say, congratulations, you have 1/6 of 200 police officers. How would you like them distributed? That's one way to do it. Another way to do it, slightly more performance measured, would be to deploy the police officers to those areas that voted for me in the greatest margins and the greatest numbers. That would be another way to do it, but not a very effective way if the goal is to save lives. A third way to do it would be to look at what the map says about where the greatest numbers of our citizens were being shot, robbed, mugged, burying their sons from violent deaths. Year in and year out, TV series after TV series for 20 years, and deploy the police officers to where they can save the most lives. That's what we did. And when people from wealthier neighborhoods said, how come I didn't get my cops? We said, look at the map. Where do you think they should go to save lives? And this is what happened. This was 1999, this red kind of kidneys of death in the one in Northwest, 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Over the next 10 years, Baltimore achieved the biggest reduction of Part 1 crime, that is combined property and violent crime, of any major city in America. Was it just a matter of putting the cops on the dots? No. There was a hell of a lot of collaboration that went on along it too. There was collaboration, there was trust building, there was policing of the police. There were a lot of things that happened, but it was that regular repeating cadence of accountability focused on the latest emerging truth. This is a slide I borrowed, because you never steal things from police. This is a slide I borrowed from the LAPD. Recently retired Commander Sean Malinowski, who's now helping in Chicago and also in Baltimore. And this is how he described the evolution in the LAPD's crime fight, their data-driven evolution. He said that since 2012, they've moved from being a very stovepiped organization to one instead where information is shared by all. From an organization that makes decisions based on intuition or hunch to one that makes decisions, and particularly when it comes to deployment, based on evidence. From an organization that responds to questions, or calls to service, 911, instead to an organization that deploys to alerts. And from the ability to make nice-looking maps or pretty maps to the ability to do some basic predictive analytics. The science not only of where, but the science of when crime occurs on any given shift. So let me give you a second example here. Roads and bridges. Many of us remember back in 2007, the Minnesota bridge collapse, right? I-35 West. Everybody knew, lots of people traveled over it every day. Everybody who should know knew that the bridge was structurally deficient and old, and yet moms and dads plunged to their death that fateful day when the bridge finally gave way and collapsed. Shortly after that tragedy, the National Governors Association had a meeting. I think we were in D.C. And Jack Dangermond came up to me with his, and he said, look, he was very excited. He said, look, he says, I have a bridge app, and I really need Governor Rendell to see it. Anybody here from Pennsylvania? Remember Governor Rendell? Governor Rendell, very passionate about the need to invest more in American infrastructure. So Jack said to his friend, can you get me a meeting with Governor Rendell? I want to show him this bridge app I have, the data and the map. He'll understand if you just get me 15 minutes with him. I said, Jack, there's a couple things you have to understand about Governor Rendell. He was kind of a mentor to me. He was mayor of Philadelphia and then governor. I said, first of all, most mayors have an attention span of like 5 minutes. Governor Rendell has an attention span of like 45 seconds. And the second thing is that he doesn't like blind meetings. So this is gonna be hard. And Jack said, please, just give me 5 minutes in the corner with him. So I grab a grousing Ed Rendell. I'm busy, I've got things. Who is this guy? Why am I meeting with him? I said, just trust me on this, please trust me. I shove him in a corner with Jack, and I look at Dangermond and I said, you've got 45 seconds. So Jack flips up the map, and after about 4 seconds of praise of Governor Rendell's advocacy for infrastructure, he says, I want to show you, what the data and the map says in this little app I've kind of put together. And he clicks the first button. He says, this is a map, Jack Dangermond says, of all of the bridges in the state of Minnesota. Each one's represented by a green dot. Now, each of these maps from open source material, each of these dots is color-coded to reflect in a simple red light to green light fashion its structural integrity, green, or its structural deficiency, red, or grades of it, orange, yellow. You get it, right? He said, now with also open data, third click. We've blown up the dots to reflect how many souls pass over these bridges every day so that you can see the targets emerge for where the structurally deficient bridges need to be repaired. And then he said, this final click, I'm going to show you where the federal dollars fall to repair those bridges at those targets. And Governor Rendell looked at it and he exclaimed, none of the dollars are landing on the targets. And Jack Dangermont said, no, but they're all landing on the map. Huh? Third and final one, clean water. Maryland, geographically, hugs the eastern and the western shores of the largest estuary in North America, the Chesapeake Bay. And for about 350 years, population increases, industrial agriculture, and by the way, this watershed spreads beyond Maryland. It's a 6-state watershed, almost all of Pennsylvania, and goes up to western New York. Population density, wastewater discharge, and runoff had meant that for about 350 years, the health of the bay had been in decline. Very stressed estuary. So we created a program called BayStat. And BayStat, in essence, I gave you the example before, the policing, figure out where the murders, rapes, robberies were happening, deployed to prevent. With BayStat, the game instead was figure out where the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the sediment is flowing from into the tributaries of this big estuary. Let's bring science to the table so that we have the people from the professors and doctors from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science at the BayStat meetings. We got onto a monthly cadence, and around that table was not just the Department of Environment, but Department of Natural Resources, Department of Agriculture, Department of Transportation. Why? Because the largest owner of blacktop in the entire state was the state itself. And most of those roads were built in a way that didn't mitigate against the damage that runoff could do. We also had the Department of Corrections there because some of the work that was helpful in our reentry efforts was restorative work in the environment that the inmates would perform. But we also had science there to call the balls and strikes. And we teased out the 36 most impactful actions from upgrading wastewater treatment plants to planting cover crops. We set goals, 2-year deadlines. A year after we started doing this, the state of Virginia started setting goals with 2-year deadlines, measuring the actions, driving performance, bringing people together in a regular cadence of accountability and collaboration. Then when President Obama was elected, we got the other 4 governors to agree to do the same thing. The federal government came on board. Their program's called Chesapeake Stat, which kind of sits over it. And President Obama made the cleanup of the Chesapeake Bay his very first executive order on clean water. And we started mapping all of it, started mapping and measuring it. And we had science to call the balls and strikes, to say that this was actually the amount of nitrogen you should be able to reduce after a season of corn on this acre. This is how much after a season of soy. And there were 6 criteria that they started doing actually in 2006, fortunately, a year before I was elected. And they looked at, there were 6 indicia that they would measure to tell you whether or not the bay was becoming any healthier. The health of the water was based on water clarity, dissolved oxygen, chlorophyll A, benthic life, the critters in the base, phytoplankton, and subaquatic grasses. So a standard measurement that they had to do every year on all the tributaries. And this is what happened. by having monthly deadlines and driving towards 2-year milestones. This was the grade that the Bay received in 2006. Again, simple red light, green light. Every citizen could see it and understand it. Red is dead. Green is living. You will notice an absence of green on this map. So that was 2006, and the cumulative grade was 39. 2007, 2008, 2009, 10. A lot of rain that year, but we persisted. 2012, 2013, 2014, 15, 16, 17. Pretty cool, huh? My first environmental secretary, Sherry Wilson, when we were teasing out the strategic goals that I mentioned before, I said, Sherry, we need a goal for the Bay. She said, please, Governor. She might have said, please, God. Please, Governor, don't set a goal with a deadline for clean water. I said, why? She said, because it takes a long time. And I said, we need a goal, Sherry. It can't be the only one. It's that important. We need a goal. We need a deadline. Difference between a dream and a goal is a deadline. We need a deadline. She said, please don't do it. I said, why? She said, what happens if we don't hit it? I said, what happens if we do? She said, what happens if we don't? I said, what happens if we do? How long are we going to play this game? So we set a goal, reach the Healthier Bay tipping point by 2020. That point at which our actions on the cover crop program, upgrading wastewater treatment cumulatively, would join with the restorative powers of Mother Nature to make the tributaries a little healthier every year rather than a little sicker. Most of the scientists who've studied this their whole lives believe that we reached that tipping point in 2016, actually 4 years earlier than we thought. So look, conclusion? There is no conclusion. You got to start. We've never had better tools. You got to start and not stop. Bring your team together. Focus regularly. Create. Military people are actually, I think, a lot better at this. They call it a battle rhythm, right? You got to create that battle rhythm, that cadence of accountability. Focus on the actions that drive you to the strategic goals. Embrace a radical commitment to openness and transparency, measure performance to lift up your leaders, and have the courage to set strategic goals with public deadlines. That final one runs way contrary to like 240 years, at least in our country, of political wisdom, which says you don't set deadlines because you make yourself vulnerable as a leader. Don't give people information unless you're actually forced to do it. You know, lots of gray bearded people tell, newly elected mayors, oh, don't share information like that. That's really bad. You better knock that website down. If they want it, they can file a Freedom of Information Act request and we'll give them an indiscernible PDF with rows and rows of information, right? Yeah, that's not openness and transparency. And you know what? People aren't stupid. They know that's bullshit. And they know you must not be on the job and you must not be doing your part in this democracy if you don't have the guts to show me whether it's the amount of discourtesy or excessive force complaints against police officers or whether my flush tax dollars are actually going to upgrade all of those wastewater systems to make the Bay better, Some of us who are older in politics might look at it as a radical commitment to openness and transparency. Our kids don't. It's the starting point, man. It is the opening ante of trust. And as Stephen Covey writes, progress only happens at the speed of trust. And that's especially true now in the information age. It's all about getting things done. Real things, not ephemeral things, not abstract things, safer neighborhoods. Better schools for my kids, public things, clean air, clean water, reversing climate change. All of these things are possible But they all require leadership. What we need are not new technologies. We need new socio-technical habits of leadership, of collaboration and management. And that's what this book is about, you know? And that's why I wrote it. You know, there's a Latin phrase, res publica. It is the phrase that is the root of that powerful word, republic. Real things, tangible things, getting things done. It's not only the root of the word, it's also the heart of the matter. That's why we have a republic. As Ben Franklin said, when asked what form of government have the founders created here as they were reading out the Declaration, the story goes that he said, a republic if you can keep it. I think we will keep it. I know we'll keep it. I believe and trust and have faith that we'll keep it because the future of our planet depends on it. Thanks very, very much.